Let's see. Come on. There we go. Let's try that. I want to say thank you for coming out. You may not have heard. Wait. You may not. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's good. You may not have heard. I actually said good morning because like 4 of you told me good morning in the lobby there. But I just want to start with a few announcements real quick. Just some stuff that's going on. I just want to make sure we don't overlook things that will be going on this week, especially. First, as you know, Keith Parker will be here this Sunday. Go ahead, again, we still have plenty of cards left out there in the lobby. Go ahead and grab those. Take them to your friends, take them to your family, and hand those things out. Pray over the meeting, everything. We would love for this to be just a huge success for the kingdom. And so be sure to grab some of these. Also, I just want to remind you that on Wednesday nights, again, the adults will be in here for a combined class. The elders will be teaching on marriage. I think that's all our announcements, so I'll hand it over. So we're going to try the microphone this week because last week a lot of you told me you could not hear me. And so we're going to give it a shot. I hope that helps out. We like new things, don't we? You think about all the different things that newness brings with it, all the things you like new. Maybe you're like me and you're a big planner and you like when you get a new calendar, like at the, coming to the end of the year, or I actually get mine like in September. I get my new calendar for the next year and start working ahead. So maybe you like that. Or, something as simple as a new pair of shoes. You just love that smell when you open the box and you have that new pair of shoes and you first get into it, how comfortable they feel. And that newness can go on in so many different ways. It can be new cars, new homes, new opportunities. Anything new just seems to grab our attention, and we love it so much. And so it shouldn't surprise you that over the years, people have been trying to find, new gospels and new different things. We always joke that around Easter and Christmas, National Geographic will always have some documentary on a new papyrus or a new book of the Bible that we're all missing that they'll come up with. Because everyone just wants something new. Now we know that Paul writes in Galatians 1 that don't accept any other gospel, right? We should just lay that foundation where we are and say, he says, don't accept any other gospel. Nothing new, he says. He says, even if I or an angel of the Lord tells you yourself, don't accept a new gospel. But there's a place where we get a new command in the New Testament. And so it's found in John chapter 13. And it's straight from Jesus. It's this new command, right? And I want to just point that out because, again, we love all these new things. So in John chapter 13, towards the end of the chapter, down in verse 34, it says this, "A new commandment I give you." All right, what is this new commandment? Jesus says that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Now, love one another is repeated 3 different times in those 2 verses. And so I think it's worth kind of pointing out there this whole idea of this new thing, this great new concept that we need to wrap our minds around is that we love each other. And then in verse 35, you notice it said, people will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. This evening, I want to ask you, do you really love one another? Have you ever thought about how the world might look in on the church, not just here at Owens Crossroads, but the church around this community and the church in this country and around the world, how the church is viewed by our love for one another? Do we bicker and fight? I haven't even been here long enough to see those things, right? But if you're anything like a normal congregation, there's probably some people in here who don't like each other. Just guessing, right? But how does the world see that? Do we show our love for each other? Because I can guarantee you this, and this at least was true in youth ministry, that no one wants to be a part of a group that hates itself, right? I think that's pretty easy to wrap our minds around. But when a group of people love each other, it draws people in. That's not just youth ministry, that's here. That's our community. When they see how we treat each other, when they see how we treat other Christians, if we're supposed to be these brothers and sisters in Christ, are we treating each other like that? That's my question for you this evening. Is have you ever really thought about how you treat your brothers and sisters and how that's viewed? And can you really sit back and say that people will know you're a disciple by your love for one another? Maybe there's something standing between you and a brother that you need to take care of. Maybe tonight I would just want to encourage you to do that. If there's something that's been there that you need to, talk to that person. If there's something that you need to confess in front of all your brothers and sisters, do that as well. And if you want to show your absolute love for God and you want to remove every obstacle, we'd love for you to be baptized this evening. So if there's anything we can do for you, please come as we stand. Father, we're grateful for all of our teachers and our elders who will be teaching our class tonight. Father, especially this evening, though, we want to lift up Miss Nell to you and all her doctors and her caretakers and her family. We ask you to be with them and comfort her and help her to get through this. Father, though, we ask you to be with each and every one of us. We know there's so many different things and different problems with each family here that we all are reaching and working for. We ask you to help us to look to you for all those solutions and to lean on each other. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
It was kind of interesting. I usually lay my phone on the podium here, and punch it every once in a while, make sure I know what time it is, and then I look up and I see this huge red digital clock right up there, and so I'm thinking that was probably installed by somebody that thought some lesson or sermon was too long, and we'll try not to do that tonight. This down just a little. So we're on lesson 2, and last week, what did we talk about? Anybody? This is how I tell whether we're making a big impression or not. So if you can't even remember the title, we're not doing it. Something about marriage. Okay, there's a good start. We were talking about what you see isn't necessarily what you get, and what that lesson was about was your perceptions, and your perceptions becoming reality, and not that you do it on purpose, but when you look at a situation, or you're in a situation for a while and you form these opinions, they kind of stick with you. And so it's something that we need to be aware of, especially in our marriages, because hopefully we're sticking with someone for a long, long time. And so we need to be aware of that when when we're in these relationships. Tonight, what I want to talk about is ways to improve your perception, and hopefully those ways to improve it can improve the reality as well. So there's and I also want to keep in mind an adage that I heard a long time ago from someone who was actually a licensed counselor, and she said you can feel your way into a better way of acting, or you can act your way into a better way of feeling. So what she's talking about is, if you start from a feeling, you want to do something, then you just do the things to make that happen. You can lay out a plan, you can make it happen. But frankly, if you're having a hard time mustering up that feeling, do the things that you think are consistent with what you want the end game to be, and you can still get there. And then eventually, you're forming habits is what you're doing. And so eventually you form the habits, and doing those things become habitual, and then you start seeing the benefits of what you should have been able to feel your way toward. Either way, you get to this end state. So keep this in mind when we're talking tonight. I want to take a running start into this. I said hopefully we'll get to a point where some of these things can change perceptions and realities, but I want to take a running start into it. So if you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Corinthians 13. Very familiar passage. What I did was I copied the passages I'm going to refer to in this sheet here. I'll even tell you what version it is. This is English Standard Version. I'm going to read, but I want to pick up on a few things here. So 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. Very familiar passage. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So, what definitions have you heard for love in this context? And if you hadn't heard this already, the love in here is agape, or agapeo, or whatever form of that you're comfortable with. What definitions have you heard for that? Most of you have been in church long enough to have heard a few definitions. So, what do you got? James said this was supposed to be participation, so I'll wait. Okay.
Not for you as the one who's giving it.
Okay. So it's something that you're doing for another person. Has anybody heard the word decision associated with this word agape, the love agape? There's 4 words for love that are used in the New Testament. Agape is one of them. And one of the words that I have always heard associated with this is it's a decision. It's a decision to love someone. And so How does that play into this? There's a couple other definitions I ran across. One from C.S. Lewis says it's a selfless love that is passionately committed to the well-being of others. And that goes along with what Tom was saying. It's for somebody else. The word passionate is in there. Keep that in mind. There's another person, Karl Barth, who was a theologian from Switzerland. Love is that independent of the question, love that is independent of the question of his or her attractiveness and with no expectation of reciprocity. Okay? Keep that last phrase in mind, no expectation of reciprocity. And so what you get out of this is that love is something that I'm going to do for someone else. It may or may not benefit me at all, but I'm going to do your way into a different way of feeling. And so I'm going to do that for someone else. Okay? Can you love someone like that without being married to them? Okay, a couple of head bobs. I'll take that as audience participation. That's good. Okay. Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, if you look at the context of where this passage is, it's between two chapters that are talking about spiritual gifts. It's not talking about a marriage. Now, we read this at every marriage, just about every marriage I've ever been to, but in the context, this isn't really having to do with the marriage. This is having to do with the way Christians get along with each other. This is the love that we should feel for each other. Now, does it apply to marriage? Absolutely. But this is something that has a much broader applicability than that. So, is this the kind of love you want for your marriage? Show of hands. Is this what you want for your marriage? Okay. Or do you want something more? Now think about the definitions that we read. Think of the words. One of the words was no expectation of reciprocity. Anybody want that for their marriage? Well, that one's kind of tough. All right. What about a selfless love, committed to the well-being of others? That would be okay. Love that's independent of attractiveness. Well, that's okay too. But this business about no expectation of reciprocity, I don't really believe that anyone really wants to engage in that kind of love with their spouse. And so I think we really do want something more. You know, the words that we use for agape love are decision, and it feels kind of clinical. But what we want is we want some emotion with it. We're getting married. We're supposed to be together. We're supposed to be forming one. And so I think we want a little bit more than what's in those few verses in 1 Corinthians. Moving on from there. How many people had a favorite toy when they were growing up? Okay. One person, two people. Nobody's admitting this. All right, I'm going to admit it. I'm comfortable in my manhood. I'm going to tell you about my teddy bear. So I had a teddy bear when I was very young. It was with me all the time. It was a black and white teddy bear. Had the fur on it, kind of a cut pile carpeting kind of fur, which I had worn to threadbare. There was no more fur in spaces where I grabbed that teddy bear. He had a little red, it's supposed to be a tongue, but it was a little felt piece that was on him, and that thing got ripped off more often than I can think. Eyeballs. He had really, really pretty eyes, and every once in a while I'd pull those things out. Well, every once in a while my mom had to take care of it. Well, what do you think I did when she was working on my teddy bear? I was right there with her. I was staring at it. Don't hurt my bear. The stuffing for it kind of got glommed together. She had to open it up and restuff it. Well, that was like major surgery on my friend. You can't be careful, because I really, really cherished that teddy bear. That was something that was with me, and it comforted me when nobody else was listening, and all those kinds of things that you think about when you're about this tall. And so, what did I feel for that teddy bear? This word cherish kind of comes to mind. Let me give you a definition of the word cherish. Lovingly protect and care for someone, to hold something dear, regard or treat something as an object of affection or as valuable. How many people want their mate to think that of them? Okay? So we do want a little reciprocity. We're okay. We understand that we need to feel that way toward our spouse, but we really want our spouse to feel that way toward us too. And I think everybody probably feels that way. You're entering into a marriage. You're going to be together for a long time. You need to get along with each other. You need to care for each other. Sometimes you're going to be out For instance, when Marcella and I got married, where we lived was 6 hours away from home. Couldn't just, have a fight and go off to see mom or anything like that. We were kind of stuck together. So we had to figure out how to work that out. Later on, we moved to California. Well, that's even further away. There was no mom there either, and so we had to kind of stick together. You have to kind of love one another, look out for each other, and cherish one another, because that's how that relationship grows and flourishes. There was a song by a group called The Association, and it was #1 in the nation, September of 1966. Anybody remember it? It's called Cherish. Okay, one person remembers it. 2 people, 3. All right, eventually we're going to really call this audience participation here. So let me read you the words to that song. Cherish is the word I use to describe all the feeling that I have hiding here for you inside. You don't know how many times I've wished that I could told you. You don't know how many times I've wished that I could hold you. You don't know how many times I've wished that I could mold you into someone who could cherish me as much as I cherish you. So what about that? You want that for your marriage? Okay, so what does it take? Just based on this song, what does it take? It takes actions on my part. That's one thing it takes. It takes feelings on my part. It takes actions on my part. But remember what I said at first. You can act your way to a better way of feeling or feel your way into a better way of acting. Either way, you can develop this cherishing relationship in your marriage. Let's turn over to Ephesians chapter 5, another familiar passage. And we're going to look around verse 25, and then I'm going to skip down to verses 28 and 29. And so this is a passage, as most of you know, where it relates the marriage relationship to the relationship that Christ has with the church. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In the same way, skipping down to 28, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. And that's in the English Standard Version. Other versions may translate that word cherish a little bit differently. But I want to pick out the 3 words. Love, sprinkled throughout that passage, it's the same agape word that we used in 1 Corinthians 13. So the same things that we talked about, love is patient, love is kind, and all those things, that's the word love that's used in Ephesians 5 as well. Nourishes. Literally, it means to bring someone up to maturity. Provide for, guard from exposure, basically care for someone. And so, in context, no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. And so, if we think of our husband and wife relationship as becoming one flesh, and we'll talk about that passage in a little bit, no one ever hated his one flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. Okay? The word cherish. To warm, that's all it means. And so as long as I am putting my arm around my wife when she's cold, I'm good. Probably not the true meaning of that word, but literally that's what it means. And so we'll go to another passage, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Get a little more insight into what Paul means about that, with that word. And Paul wrote Ephesians, Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians, Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. And so we're getting his use, one person's use of the same word, so you expect a little bit of consistency here. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verses 7 and 8. But we proved to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. Okay? Let's call out a few words there. One of them I want to mention specifically because we were talking about cherish. This idea of the mother tenderly caring for, that's cherish. Now, that means more than put my arm around my wife, more than keep her warm. Tenderly cares for. There's something a little more to that than just keeping somebody warm. So now you could overinterpret that, and you can say, well, what it means is keep someone feeling warm and comforted emotionally. Make sure that you know that that person feels that you want them to be comforted emotionally. So that's one. Gentle. We prove to be gentle among you. Okay? We can adopt that too. You want to be gentle because the opposite of gentle is harsh. Why would you be harsh to your mate? Why would you want to be harsh to your spouse? You stood up in front of a few people and said, I do, to a lot of things that didn't involve being harsh to my spouse. And so, gentle. We can do that. Another word, so fond and affection for you. Okay? How many people want fond affection when they're married? Yes. Okay, more heads are bobbing. This is good. We're going the right direction here. So, fond affection. There's some action involved in that too. Well pleased to impart to you. Okay? How many people want their spouse to be giving? And what he's imparting, not only the gospel of God. Okay, that's something very important. So I'm imparting to you things that are very important. Also, our own lives. Well, in Ephesians 5, Christ gave his life for the church, and so that's very consistent. Should we feel that sacrificial about our spouses? Yes, we should. I felt that way about my bear when it was laying open with all the stuffing scattered all over the place. I can at least feel that way about my wife. And then the last one, you'd become very dear to us. That's along the same lines of the affection thought. Yes, you want to be very dear. You want to be thought of as very dear, and you want to express that because you want that relationship where both of you think of each other that way. All right? How well do I need to know somebody to love them, like we were talking about with this word agape? 1 Corinthians 13, Ephesians 5. How well do I need to know somebody to love them? Wow, these are not that hard. Is it?
I think that was actually pretty difficult.
Okay.
If you're being honest with yourself. Because do you want to love somebody that much and have them be truly a bad person on the inside?
No, but remember, it's a decision. It's a decision, and you're deciding to love that person, again, with no expectation of reciprocity. Yes, you want the best for them. You absolutely do. But suppose they're not, suppose they're being self-destructive. Do you still love them? Yes, you do. As a matter of fact, you might even love them more because they need it more if they're being self-destructive. And so do you need to know them though? I mean, could I come up to someone that I barely know at work and again be patient with them, be kind, not envious, not boastful, all those things that we read about in 1 Corinthians? I would submit that you don't really have to know someone very well to love them according to agape. Now, it's always better if you do, because then you have some information as you get to know them more that would be even more helpful. You would be able to love them in a way that would be more effective to getting them to lead their lives in certain ways. And so it's always better to know somebody as well as you can. But to actually love someone like agape, I could do that without knowing them really well. But what about cherish? Can I cherish someone without knowing them really well? That would be a whole lot tougher. Because to cherish someone, I got to figure out what is it that they need? What can I do that would be beneficial? And it's kind of along the lines of the agape when you're trying to be more effective in the way you love someone. But when you think about it, to cherish someone, I've got to develop a much deeper relationship because I have to have some knowledge to be effective in cherishing that person. Any comments about that? Anybody arguing? No?
I think that the idea of loving without expecting anything. I think this idea of loving without expecting anything in return, along with this cherish, is, Kay may fix my breakfast for me, and she doesn't expect me to reciprocate and fix hers often. But still, the idea of not expecting something. When the Lord said that, or through the apostles, 1 Corinthians 13, Ephesians 5, and he gave us the church as an example, he expects us to love him back. But he didn't die just for that. Romans chapter 5, he said that God commends his love to us, that while we were yet sinning against him,
Mm-hmm.
Christ was willing to die for us. But still, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And that love there is the same word that you started with, agape.
It is.
If you love. So now the cherished part to that is, we get into this thing, into this marriage thing, we have some expectations out of all of this. And Paul talks about them in 1 Corinthians
7.
chapter 11. There is some expectations, but those expectations are below what we should be expecting out of ourselves for that marriage. And so to cherish someone is like me going out in my garden and tilling that soil and making sure the weeds don't take over, things like that. We have to work on that cherishing thing every day.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you're in your garden, you're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to get to know those plants. You know what's around them. You're going to develop a lot of knowledge about how best to move the soil around to get them to grow better, how much to water to get them to grow better. You're going to develop a lot of knowledge about that as you go. You know, you first go. We do. And so what I'm getting at is that I think that's more along the lines of cherishing that plant than loving it unconditionally, like this word agape. And if you think about the sacrifice that Christ made, that passage in Romans 5, while we were yet sinners, okay, we weren't reciprocating. We weren't reciprocating. When Christ sacrificed himself for his church, the church wasn't in existence for one thing, but we weren't reciprocating. The people that would later form the church weren't. And so that was a decision that was made for our benefit, but there was foreknowledge. God knew that some people would reciprocate eventually, but at the time, we weren't. Yes?
I think the reciprocity is not necessarily, when like a wife cooks breakfast or whatever, not expecting the same thing in return, but thanks, honey. That feeling appreciated, and that is the reciprocity. But a lot that we get out of marriages and sometimes out of friendships, that's what that emotional expectation is part of. Now, the 1 Corinthians 13, that's more of general loving relationships with everybody. But when you're talking about relationships as far as family, friends, marriages, you have to have that emotional aspect, and there's going to be that appreciation. You have to have that part in there.
So hold on to that thought. We're going to be getting there in a little bit in this lesson too. But hold on to that thought, because reciprocity doesn't necessarily mean reciprocity in kind. If Marcella gets up and fixes my breakfast day in, day out for years and years and years, and I just kind of grunt and say, But if I'm faithfully taking out the trash, that could be considered reciprocity. So it doesn't necessarily mean in kind, but hold on to that thought. Anything else? Okay. I was going for the mic. Go ahead.
There we go. I was just going to say, to me, the biggest thing, and maybe it's just how I view it, is the difference between just this general love, right, and then this cherishing love is when you cherish something, it is valuable to you, right? To me, that's just the easiest way to view it, is if something is valuable to you, you will cherish it, whether it's an inanimate object or a person. But until you can get to that point, and it may not be giving you anything in return, but like that bear, like it was valuable to you, and that's where that cherish comes from. And so, yeah, sometimes it looks different in different ways.
Right.
But it has to come with that value.
Yes, and that's even part of the definition. Remember when we read the definition, it was to be valuable to someone, and so that's definitely a part of it. Okay, when you think of cherish, think of the way Christ feels towards the church. Think of the way the mother feels towards her children. That's the idea of cherish, and I think we all do want that in our marriage. But there's a circle. You know, the more you get to know someone, like Patty was saying, it involves a deeper knowledge of someone to know how to cherish them most effectively. And so you're going to find out good things and bad things as you get to know that person deeper and deeper. But remember our first lesson. First lesson was your perceptions become your reality. Change your perception about what is a flaw, for instance. That one came up last week as well. A flaw isn't necessarily a flaw in everybody's eyes. I mean, you develop habits that become flaws in someone's eyes, but when you're doing it, you don't think of it as a flaw, you just think of it as something I do. And so you can change your perception about what you consider to be a flaw. As you get to know your spouse, you find out all kinds of things. All of those things together are what made your spouse who he or she is. And so you consider it a flaw, but think of how that could be a positive. You know, personality traits, for instance. So just something to store in the back of your head. I said we'd get to Genesis 2:24, where it talks about, I'll just read it. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. They shall become one flesh. And that's the way the New American Standard New King James translates it. This idea of joined, if you were in the Sunday morning class when we were talking about 1 Corinthians, I said it's a difference between cohesion and adhesion. Adhesion is I stick something together and I tape it together and I can pull it apart, not a problem. Both of these parts look the same when I pull them apart. That's adhesion. If I go in there and I melt them together or I weld them together and then I pull them apart, I'm going to see a scar from when they were joined together. And so what God wants in the marriage is He wants us to be together in a cohesive fashion, not adhesive. He doesn't want us to be able to pull apart and act like there was never anything together. Cohesive, intermingle, melt together. And so when you think about that, there's a level of intimate knowledge associated with that. And so plays into the idea of cherish. So something that you'd want to think about when you're thinking, how well do I know my spouse? How would I get to know him better? God wants me to know my spouse better. He wants me to be cohesively joined to my spouse. And so that's what gives you the intimate knowledge that tells you how to be most effective when you're cherishing. So there's a story that's, I've heard it a lot, so it's probably not true. A woman complained to her husband that he never told her he loved her, and she wanted to hear it. And he says, well, we got married, I told you I loved you, and I'll tell you if I change my mind. And so think about that. Do you think the wife really wanted to just hear, I love you every once in a while? Or did she want him to kind of demonstrate that every once in a while? You know, saying it would be a good first step, but I think she probably wanted the demonstration of it as well. And again, act your way into a better way of feeling. If he keeps saying I love you over and over again, he might actually start to believe it after a while. So act your way into a better way of feeling. What wasn't she getting? It wasn't just assurance that he hadn't changed his mind. It was this close relationship that we've been talking about. It wasn't just that I need to know if you change your mind. It's a matter of I need you to demonstrate this to me. I need you to show me every once in a while that you love me. There we're getting into the cherish part. If you want to know what makes your spouse feel cherished, the easiest way would be to ask. And I know this is a really radical idea. If you have to, you could text a question or something like that. But you know, talking, much better. So a little homework. If your spouse tries this, it's tonight or tomorrow night or something like that, have an answer ready. Because I can also tell you that if you ask, what makes you feel cherished, and someone says, oh, I don't know. What do you do with that? I don't know. Well, I don't know how to cherish you either. And so have an answer ready. Think about it. Think about what would make you feel. And again, back to the definition. What would make you feel valuable? What would make you feel dear? What would make you feel like an object of affection? What would make you feel that way? Have that answer ready in case your spouse actually does do this. Yes?
So there's lots of studies on, how we all display our love for each other. And if you don't know, you have somebody that says they don't know,
Mm-hmm.
something called the 5 love languages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that if that happens, and anybody you're talking to and you're trying to help somebody, have them look that up. It's because you're saying, do they want them to say it or they want them to show it? Some people really want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's words of affirmation. So you really have to know the person you're trying to cherish and understand what
Mm-hmm.
they want.
Well, so what kinds of things do you think you might hear? I mean, Keith brought up these 5 love languages. What kinds of things do you think you might hear if you were to ask someone, how do you want to be cherished? Some people write cards, and that's just the best thing. My dad passed away in 2012. My mom passed away in 2016. And my sisters and I had to go through their house. My dad was an engineer, so he was all about these touchy-feely stuff, and so not really. But we got into a drawer, and it was chocked full of cards that my dad had written to my mom. And my mom was one of these people that loved cards. He knew that. I don't know if they talked about it or he just knew it, just based on her actions. He had written her, we don't even know how many cards. The drawer was full. We didn't count them. And, you feel kind of strange about it, but we started looking through some of those cards, and some of the things he said to her, just very tender and loving things. And when I think about my mom and how she might have reacted to that, she would have loved that and probably did love that. And that's probably why he did it, is because he was cherishing his wife in a way that she wanted to be cherished. What else? What other than cards might you hear about if somebody says, how do you want to be cherished? Mm-hmm.
Years ago, Ken and I attended Marriage and Bridge seminar.
Was this Burkina and Faulkner?
Yeah.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And he told a story about a man who was always going to do something nice for his wife, do something. And he said so every so often, for just no reason, he would stop at a store and buy her a Snicker candy bar. And he would give her that Snicker candy bar. And he said he couldn't have bought her a diamond ring if she would have loved him more than that Snicker candy, because he could constantly. He said that the next day he stopped at a store because he liked Snicker candy bar. And he said, he told the guy at work, he said, I'd like to buy a Snicker candy bar. And he said, I'm sorry, we sold out. He said, there's been more men in here buying Snicker candy bars. And so for years, I bought Kay, instead of big presents, I got her a card and a Snicker candy bar.
Mm-hmm.
And I still had to buy the ring, but
But it's a good point. Some of this cherishing, some of the things that make you feel the warmest, the most valuable, the most cherished, they don't have to be thousands of dollars. They don't have to be huge. Sometimes it's a hug. There are people that they're huggers. And if you want them to feel cherished, hug them. They'll love it. Funny thing about this Burkina and Faulkner's seminar, though, Marcella and I were married for, was it 2 weeks? 3 weeks? I can't tell. How many fingers am I holding? 3 weeks. And And so we'd gotten back from our honeymoon, and then we came home, and it was in Virginia Beach. Parents lived around there. We went to the Burkina and Faulkner marriage seminar. You can't believe the number of people that came up to us and said, "You having trouble already?" But I will tell you, that seminar is fantastic. One of the things that they concentrate on is communication, and that was something that was mentioned last week as well as being really, really important. And it's kind of like this cherishing business. You've got to know how to communicate effectively. People hear in different ways. People have different impressions. Even your spouse. Women and men hear things differently, want to hear things differently. And he went into all that in this seminar. And so it was a really good seminar. I think the only place it exists is on VHS tapes or something like that. But it was really good. If you have a chance, watch it. It's a long seminar. It took us, 2 days? Good long time, but it's well worth it. But the idea here, though, everybody's individual. So the most effective way, the most direct way, how do you want to be cherished? Well, have an answer for that. And then if you're asking the question, be big enough to do it. I mean, you ask the question for information. Use the information. And so that's one thing. There's another story about a guy that was wandering around at an auto parts store, and his wife was kind of following him. She didn't want to be in the auto parts store anyway, and so she was walking around with him, and he goes over to these really expensive tires, and he starts looking at them and looking at the tread and all this kind of stuff, and his wife's over there just bored stiff, I guess. And so she finally says, "Why do you have to buy the most expensive tires in the whole store?" And he turns around and he says, "I'm buying these cars for you because I want you to be the safest that I can possibly make it." And so what do you think her reaction was to that? Eventually that might have cost him a set of tires, but for that instant it cost him nothing to turn around and just make that comment because it was an expression of how much he cherished his wife. He didn't want her to be in a car accident because of something that he could have prevented by buying a few tires. And so cards, little presents, big presents, hugs, anything like that. But it's a personal thing. Ask, what do they want? And be able to act on it. So if you're the giver, if you're the one that wants to cherish your spouse, what might keep you from fulfilling that? What kinds of things might get in the way? I mean, one could be you didn't really mean it, but let's discount that already. Let's just say you really were sincere and you really did want to do things that cherished your spouse. What might get in the way? Their reaction, okay.
You try
Mm-hmm.
You try giving them something and they wanted you to tell them something, or you wanted to do something
Right.
for them.
Yep. Yeah, you didn't communicate that cherishing in the way that they wanted it communicated. You just kind of missed the mark. Well, if you're the receiver, be forgiving of that. But that's one other thing. We'll get to that. But what might get in the way? What happens to you in your daily life? I mean, people have to go to work. That takes a lot of time away. People have children. They take a lot of time away. People have hobbies. People do all kinds of things. And what do those things do? They kind of take away the time that you have to cherish your spouse. And so it's not to say that they're not important. Emergencies always crop up. Things happen. You got to take care of it right now. Everybody understands that. But if you're asking someone, how can I cherish you? How do you want to be cherished? And they tell you, make it a really high priority to do that. Because this is your marriage you're investing in. This is something that's supposed to last you a lifetime. And so take the time to do that.
So if you love to bass fish and it's going to get in the way, make sure you marry someone who loves to bass fish.
That'd be a good way to do it, yeah. And I will say, too, that I've heard of people that, couples where, the man and the woman like to do two different things, but can you do them together? I mean, things like, I want to go to car shows. I want to go to antique shops. Well, let's go take a road trip. All that time in the car, I can tell you from past experience, time in the car is really precious time because what else are you going to do but talk to each other? I mean, I guess you could turn on the radio and ignore each other, but that's going to look real funny to people that pass you coming towards you with you just sitting there stone-faced. Use the time to talk. Stop off at an antique show, stop off at a car show. Make a day out of it. Spend some time together. You can try and combine the things that you're going to do, even if they're kind of disparate to each other. So what happens if you aren't able to do that? Somebody tells you, here's what I think would feel really good to me. Here's how you could really tell me that you'd cherish me. And you keep missing it. You keep not doing it. Well, over time, your spouse is going to get a little jaded. Why'd you ask in the first place? Well, that little question in and of itself kind of betrays an attitude. Why did you even ask? Why are you teasing me like this? Why did you ask and then you don't do it? Or, when are you going to do it? Why are you doing this to me? And then eventually they're going to get to the point, well, I'm going to feel unloved. I'm going to feel uncherished because it never happens. I told you what I want, but nothing ever comes of it. This is that reciprocity thing. Not a part of the agape love, but it's certainly a part of cherishing. And so someone's going to feel pretty uncherished if you always miss the opportunity to cherish them the way they told you. And again, it's not a one-time. Yes?
Instead of asking them what would make you for me to cherish you, what would you like? I think that it doesn't take long in a marriage relationship to figure out what it takes. And then if you don't do it, whether they ever told you that or not, your mother probably never told your father, hey, if you want to cherish me, send me cards. I think he already knew somewhere shortly thereafter. And that's the reason that drawer was full of those cards. Because he didn't fall down on his responsibility of cherishing your mother.
Yep.
And so, we all anybody that's been married for a year or two, they pretty much know what their spouse is. Now whether or not they follow through on that is
Yes. Yeah. And I agree.
You forget about stuff like that because I think, hey, my wife, she knows I'm not going anywhere. She's the best. She knows I love her. And I'll forget. I'll forget the way she wants me to be and to show her that she's number one. So I think you do kind of have to remind yourself. You do, because we think for how we want to be treated, we'll treat them that way. And it's not that we are necessarily not trying to please her, but I will do it like I think. And it's different sometimes than, I think we'll get in that habit. Well, she knows I'm not going anywhere, so I don't have to tell her.
Is this the, if I change my mind, I'll let you know? Oh, you weren't, never mind. That was unfair. You weren't in the room when we went through that story.
But even, I think you think
Susan
your
will tell
own
you.
way. And so maybe, I'll let you know if I change my mind, but not really, because it sounds bad.
Well, yes. So, all right. So let's go to that. Okay. Remember, one of the things that I said is, if you tell your spouse how you want to be cherished, or they make a stab at it, give them credit for it, because they're trying. And if it needs to be honed a little bit, you know what you can do? You can just say, and do it kindly. Love is kind. You can just say, if you had done something like this, it would have made so much more of an impression. It would have been so much more loving to me. And if you change your mind about how you want to be cherished, absolutely, let them know, but be kind about it. Okay, Jake?
Kind of in the mindset that reciprocity should be a condition, and that's not true, because like Chad was saying, if you do something the way that you think that that's supposed to be done, a lot of people give up because they're not getting love back or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My dad gave me some advice a long time ago, and he said, whether Andrea, she left the room so I can say this, whether she does the things that you want her to or not, doesn't matter, because I made a promise to God when I married her that I would love her. It doesn't matter how she reacts to what I do for her, if I go to work at 5 in the morning and have 4 meetings and come home and the kids are all over me and she wants attention, I can't just blow her off because I don't feel like it. It's not, I told her I would love her forever, but I made a promise to God that I would. It's not just to her. And a lot of marriages, I think, fail because, I really tried with my wife and she just didn't love me back in the way I wanted to, so we couldn't reconcile and we got divorced. Well, it doesn't matter if she does or not.
Yeah. So think about what you're doing here. What you're doing is you're reconciling love and cherish. And that's what we need to do. Whether or not you respond positively to my feeble attempts to cherish you, I'm still going to love you. But how much better it would be if we could get on the same wavelength of cherishing one another. Melissa?
Ooh, I have a microphone. I was just going to say something that, I think it was something that he said back there. It's just, you think about like your physical health and how, I know guys don't necessarily do this as much as women do, about being sure to get your annual physical, and being sure to stay on top of, knowing how you're doing health-wise. But it's like if you could look at your emotional health with your spouse, and if you could look at your, the way that you cherish them, similar to, hey, let's do a tweak here. Let's check and see, just a romantic checkup. Let's see how we're cherishing one another, and do that. Maybe it's once a year, or maybe it's once every couple months, or I don't think it necessarily would have to be
Scheduled?
Annually or scheduled. But I think if we looked at our relationships the way that we look at our bodily health, and we think about that emotion there, we would have those conversations, or maybe not even a direct conversation, but we would just kind of check up on, okay, am I cherishing him the way that I did or wanted to, when we made those vows? Am I asking myself on a regular basis, is he getting what he needs from me? Is he getting the emotional and the, physical needs met? I think it's just something, if we're making an active attempt to stay on top of that, whether it's, a few times a year or dozens of times a year, I think as long as we're just trying to be intentional about making that connection and making that count and making it matter, I think that's a big part of keeping us healthy.
Yes, it is. Let me give you one more thought before we close. We're actually a little over right now. Appreciate all the comments, but one more thought. Think of your spouse as a gift from God. Because if you think about how that first marriage, quote unquote, came into being, Eve was separated from Adam, but then came back together. And that was a gift from God. And so think of your spouse as that gift from God. And what do you do with the gift? You cherish the gift. So, any other comments before we close? Let's go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the time that you've given us to study your word, to interpret things for the benefit of the marriage relationships that we have. Help us to always look to you for guidance for the things that you would want us to do, both in our own lives and in our lives together with our spouses. Help us to recognize the ways that we should love each other, the way we should cherish each other, and help us to communicate that. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.